instead of static pages. And applications are being moved today, instead of being run at the departmental or even at a corporate center, they're being moved up into the cloud. So what you see in these large data centers is not just simple racks of computing power that you might have today, but these are actually sophisticated data centers that offer much more than the sort of infrastructure that you could probably build yourself. You know, they offer things like automatic provisioning. So when we go to our website and we're building our application and we upload that up through the Azure portal up into my account where we're going to deploy it, you'll see that servers get deployed and spun up for me automatically. You know, I have no idea where these servers are, and if I'm running an application that requires storage or other connectivity, all of these things are provisioned for me automatically. And I can ask for as much scalability as I need. High availability is given to me, as a matter of course, rather than being something that I have to design into the application. And it's something that's actually not impossible to do today, but it would be very difficult and very expensive for me to do that on a one-by-one basis on many different applications. When I'm using cloud computing, I can take advantage of this massive infrastructure that's available to me just by clicking a few buttons.
And what you see on the slide really is the answer to a lot of questions you might have about, well, why cloud computing or why Windows Azure? And there were both technical and business reasons to consider that. One kind of justification for cloud computing is if you think about some of the trends we've had in the past, the idea of hosting, that maybe you don't run everything locally. Virtualization has come about in the enterprise as a way of giving you a lot more flexibility about where you put things and an easy way to pass around whole environments. The cloud is really a logical extension of those ideas, and so there's a lot of prior work going on with different technologies and trends that points the way in this direction. There are some really nice technical reasons to do cloud computing. A lot of things that are just not hard to do in the enterprise are easy to do in the cloud computing environment, availability and scalability on demand. And there are also business reasons. So we have this pay-as-you-go idea of utility computing, where it's like a monthly electric bill or water bill. You only pay for what you use. That means you're not buying servers in advance. You're not having to figure out advanced capacity. And you're not being punished if you use less this month than you used last month.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's actually something that David, you and I, when we're working on a large application, one of the key things that we do is we help clients with sizing, right? And this is often a critical decision. You know, you're actually making, in some cases, massive outlays, in capital, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in capital, and you're basing that on assumptions that we're making about how the application is going to be used, years down the road. And to be able to take that from sort of that capital expenditure into an operating expense is very attractive to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the whole sort of the Lego slide or the layer cake slide here, this is something I like to talk about because there is a difference between Windows Azure and the Azure platform, right? So the Azure Services Platform is really everything you see in the bottom two-thirds or three-fourths of the slide, right? It's built on top of something called Windows Azure, which is the cloud operating system, if you will. So Windows Azure is a cloud operating system, and then built on top of that are a set of services. And those include things that may be familiar to you, live services. .NET services are a series, well, they were originally called BizTalk services, right? And I always give the guys on the BizTalk team at Neudesic a bit of a harder time because when they were called BizTalk services, they didn't really get a lot of attention, but except from the BizTalk people. But .NET services are all about connectivity and also SQL data services. Gives you SQL Server type features, and there's been an announcement just recently that there's going to be more parity between SQL data services and SQL Server. So if you're familiar with, or you're accustomed to taking advantage of stored procs and real tables, things that weren't in the initial release of SQL data services, you'll see that things more like that will be coming out in the future. Live services is all about live mesh and features like that, authentication, and then two service kind of buckets that aren't actually available yet. SharePoint services and dynamic CRM services are going to be available in the future. And this isn't an exhaustive list. You can actually create your own services, which I think is a pretty exciting part of that whole package, right, David? I mean, we could build our own application up in the cloud. I mean, if we see that there are some features that we're leveraging that we can, either offer for free to partners or maybe make some money off of, we can actually put our own services up there, and Microsoft has a way for us, or is going to have a way for us to leverage those, right?
That's right. So people who are watching this who are independent software vendors should be thinking about all the opportunities for a whole ecosystem of add-on services. As Microsoft technology, the community plays a big role in fleshing things out. For the areas you just touched on, Mickey, the big areas again are the way I think of them. Live services is really the social layer of Windows Azure.
Right.
.NET services is really all about giving enterprise-ready features. For example, an enterprise might not want to use the cloud if they weren't convinced that there was strong security available that they could relate to. SQL services, of course, is your database in the cloud, and Windows Azure really is the place where applications can run in the cloud, which we'll be showing shortly, as well as the low-level storage as cloud.
Right, right. And then across the top, we also have the live and the online branding. So the live branding tends to be more consumer-based sort of features like Office Live or Windows Live ID, those sorts of things that Live Messenger, all of those that live branding is really about consumer focus or a single end user focus, right? Whereas online is the business branding or enterprise branding. And the interesting thing is that all of these different services and products, they're all living on top of Azure, right? So it's all available and running today. It's not something that's just rolling out at some point later in the year.
That's a good point. Much of its infrastructure before it was announced as a cloud computing initiative was already being used by Microsoft for online communities, and so the guinea pigs are the first to be using it.
Right. Okay, so software and services, sort of software plus services. That's kind of a unique way that Microsoft's branding this idea that one way to look at this new vision is to have applications that are running in the enterprise like you're accustomed to today. So applications like Word or Excel, but those are applications that are running on your desktop. But then you can join them together with services that are up in the cloud. So if you take them and you combine them together, you might have an offering like a CRM application, for instance, that has one component which is running locally on the desktop, and then it's depending on services that are up in the cloud. And if the cloud's not available, then of course the application can still run locally.
And this is a deceptively simple term. This is a very, very powerful concept, and it's also, if you're wondering what differentiates Microsoft's cloud computing platform from those of other vendors, this is it right here, software plus services. This strategy is all about, instead of Microsoft coming in and saying, well, the technology world is changing and certain things have to be done in the cloud now instead of the enterprise, and instead of taking that approach, the approach to taking is you have a great body of enterprise software to work with. Those choices are going to stay there. Nobody's taking them away from you. And in the additive fashion, we're giving you new technological capabilities in the cloud and new business models to consider. And you determine the split. What is right for your organization to run locally versus out there in the cloud? It's very powerful and it's very unique to Microsoft.
Yeah, I think we have a slide coming up where we're going to show graphically that there's several different options for organizations that might have software today that might be running in a data center or might be running in the enterprise, and there are actually several different ways for you to kind of slice and dice and leverage what's available. Okay, so for instance, software and services today we have over on the left, if you have software that's on-prem, you might have a load balancer on top, and we're flowing down into some IIS web servers that are running on Windows Server 2008, and then we're backed by a SQL cluster. Now in the cloud, we can actually get much the same sort of effect, right? So if we have services, we can also run those in with a load balancer, and we can farm those out to different machines up in the cloud. And then behind those web services, we can depend on either Azure storage or on SQL data services.
That's right, and the key difference here is in the scenario on the left, the familiar scenario, you've got to go to your crystal ball and think a little bit about, well, what's my peak capacity going to be? I'm going to go out and buy those servers and hope you have it right. And so you've got outlets of money there to buy your hardware. And of course, 18 months later, your IT people are going to tell you those servers are old and obsolete and need to be replaced. You're going to be busy patching an operating system on them and all of that. And then you have them. You spent the money and you have them and they have to be somewhere. The scenario on the right is that you upload your software and some marching orders, some instructions to the cloud, and the number of servers you run, for example, at the web tier or in the data side, is under your control, and you can change it anytime you want to. So if you see more demand happening there, you'd simply authorize a larger number of instances. If you're, for example, a seasonal business or business is down in part of the year, well, then you make it smaller, and you're only paying for what you use.
Right. And I like to just say one thing about the slide also, is the real story is actually a bit more nuanced even than this. I mean, this is actually a nice kind of a one-for-one, hey, we have apples, and then we have a different kind of apple up in the cloud. But we could also have the application servers running in the cloud, and then through .NET Services, we could actually be picking up our data from services that we have running even on-prem, right? We don't necessarily need to have everything up in the cloud. We can actually take a much finer-grained look at it if we weren't doing the architecture in PowerPoint, right?
That's right, and you bring up an important point, Mickey. A lot of people started to look at this cloud computing thing or the Azure platform, and they figure they've got it. But actually, it's big. There's a lot to it, and it's not that it's complex or hard to understand, but it's sort of a large land of adventure where there are lots of different places you can visit and a lot of different ways to do things, and then also a lot of ways to combine what the cloud can do for you with your local applications. So even if you think you've sort of already got a grounding in it, it's worth looking to the different areas and really getting an appreciation for what it can do and what new ideas that may suggest to you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking at the platform here, you can see that there are actually analogs for all the different sorts of enterprise software you might be familiar with today over on the left. There are similar offerings that are available in the cloud. So up at the top of the, more or less the top of the stack, you have Exchange and SharePoint and CRM, and each of those traditional server offerings are also available, and analogs are available in the cloud. So the great thing about this is that it gives you an opportunity if you're an organization that's too small for a traditional Exchange installation, or you might not want to install SharePoint on your own because you might be relatively small. You have the opportunity to basically have tenant service and take advantage of SharePoint or Exchange or Dynamics CRM online. The great thing about that is that you pay for exactly that slice of the pie that you need. So if I have 5 users in my organization that need Exchange, then I really only need to pay for the licenses to get those 5 people online. I don't need to spin up a whole Exchange server just to get them online. And so it's really great for organizations that are growing and are dynamic. And then in terms of database storage, recent announcements that SQL Data Services is going to have more parity with SQL Server is actually pretty exciting. So if I have a relatively small departmental app, or if I have an app that I know is going to be bursty or have unknown growth aspects, or I'm just architecting it to be in the cloud anyway, I can take advantage of SQL Data Services. And there's a story for identity. And then in terms of platform, there's Windows Azure for the operating system. It's built on top of, it doesn't replace Windows Server 2008. It's an entire infrastructure for cloud computing. You have something, David?
Just to point out, you can see from this diagram how all the new stuff is additive, right? The options we used to aren't growing, we're getting a parallel set of options to look at in the cloud now.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, I mean, you and I deciding that we're going to use SQL Data Services for part of a new application we're building, or to augment an existing application, doesn't mean that we have to throw away the investment in SQL Server. You know, if we want to start taking advantage of, well, we already obviously have Exchange at Neudesic, but that would be something that we could offer one team. You know, if the team was new and didn't have easy access to Exchange for whatever reason, we could always offer them access to Exchange online. Okay, so in terms of how this stuff grows, let's take a look at the traditional sort of on-prem enterprise story where I have an application and it's split into 3 logical tiers. Well, I guess this isn't the exact usual logical tiers, but front and back end storage. And the idea behind the cloud is that it doesn't necessarily limit me. I'm not forced to go fully onto the cloud. I might decide to take an existing application and offer up, if I want to extend it and add a new service to it, I could have it in the cloud just as easily as I would have it on-prem. Right? I can use the same programming techniques I use today. A lot of the communication between, you know, the way that this would work is using WCF, or it's using XML, or it's using REST. It's all technologies that, you know, that I and people on my team understand. We're not buying new tools. It's just the location for the service would happen to be up in the cloud.
Exactly. And you can see here some different ideas for what you can do with your existing applications. You might just keep them local, but take advantage of something in the cloud that's new to you.
Right.
You could elect to move the entire application to the cloud, all the parts of it, and that might make sense to you. We also think there's going to be more and more composite applications where some parts of your application are local and some parts are in the cloud. And you're starting to see that pattern a lot with both business and consumer software, for example, Zune, where you have software sold locally, but you're also accessing something like a music store over the internet.
Right, and this is what I call the happy accident, right? Because if we get into a situation where we're moving services and our storage up into the cloud, it actually becomes very easy for us then to expose those services to other partners, right? It's kind of the same sort of thing that you would get for free if you started moving. When I was an early adopter in the whole SOA thing, it was interesting to discover that because we were forced to be decoupled and we were forced to use isolation patterns with those services and decouple things, that it made it easier for us to exchange information and exchange contracts rather than tight binding and that kind of thing. I think it's sort of the same sort of deal. If we have services and storage available in the cloud, it becomes much easier for us to compose them into reusable units that can be offered to partners and possibly make a profit off services that we would have normally just hidden in the back office somewhere.
Exactly. The way I look at it, we have more patterns available to us, which means we can do a better job building solutions, and there's more options to easily fit the technology to the job at hand.
Yeah. So in terms of scalability, if you start out in an application and I load up my components and I deploy them up to the cloud and I say that I have a need for X amount of power in my front end, back end, and storage roles, at some point when David and I decide to run a Super Bowl commercial, we can transition into a more scalable sort of topology, right? Without going out and buying new racks of hardware and taking advantage and having to figure out how to deploy that in our tiny broom closet data center and all that sort of thing. And then at some point after our ad has run, we can drop back down to our normal size. Now, that's also very interesting for customers that are in seasonal businesses, right, David? I mean, we do have some customers that we've talked to where there might be literally a few weeks out of the year where they need to size up and be in this sort of super scalable stance, but then they would really like to be in a position where they don't have to pay for that all year long.
It's really dynamic. The fact that you don't have to figure out your load needs ahead of time, that you don't have to buy servers ahead of time, that you have all the capacity you could ever need as you grow at a moment's notice, and that you also don't get punished for scaling back, joined with the idea that there's not going to be any kind of long-term commitment in this business model, it gives you tremendous freedom that you've never had before.
Yep. Okay, so let's build something, and let's just kind of go on. This is the part, David, where you should say, Mickey, you forgot to share your desktop.
Mickey, you forgot to share your desktop.
Okay.
Well, while Mickey's getting set up for that, I'm going to just talk a little bit briefly about what's involved here. So if you're going to develop an application that's actually going to run and live in the cloud, some different types of applications you might build, but here we're going to do just a simple web application. What does that really involve? Well, as you're going to see, if you haven't played with any of Azure yet, it's going to involve some things that are very familiar to you and some things that are new. And so we're going to start out in a very familiar place, Visual Studio. But as you'll see, Mickey is choosing a cloud service template, something that you're probably not used to seeing in Visual Studio unless you've downloaded the Azure SDK.
Right. So I actually have the full boat of SDKs, and they come in a few different chunks, right? But the ones that I'm using right now are the Azure SDK and then the Visual tools for Azure, the Visual Studio tools for Azure. Okay. So I spin that right up.
So I noticed in the solution that it just generated, Mickey, I see something familiar and something unfamiliar. Your solution, I noticed, has two projects instead of one. The second one looks to me like a good old regular ASP.NET web project. I see there's a default ASPX, and from what I can tell, the HTML and the code behind and the web config look pretty normal. But then there's another project earlier. What's that all about?
Yeah, this is actually the web service, right? So if you look at this, you can see that we have a web role for our application, and if we look at the configuration and service definition files, you have information here. For instance, the configuration lets me set a number of instances that I want to run. So that's where I'm going to set part of my scalability for this role. And the web role is going to be the web application. I could, for instance, while we're going to run this locally, I can set this to run on 3 instances at the same time. I can also set additional configuration settings. And then for the service definition, it's just information about the endpoint and service level sort of config information. But we're going to wind up uploading this stuff to the cloud eventually.
I see. So this extra project sort of provides the metadata that lets the cloud know how we want the service to be run and to what size footprint. Is that correct?
Yep, exactly. So let me just create a really simple web app. Whoops. Come back here. Let me show off my extremely impressive ASP.NET skills. You better talk, because if I try to talk and type at the same time,
I will talk. You said something very enticing earlier. You said I upload this to the cloud. You almost made me think you don't have to upload it to the cloud right away. In fact, I have a question for you. Could you be doing this right now if you were at 30,000 feet in an airplane?
Yes, I could. And in fact, later today, I will be flying to Mix, and I could just to do it. I'll do it on the airplane on the way, assuming I have room on my seat. I'm not sure if that's going to work.
So how is that possible? We keep hearing about these amazing data centers, and you need an internet connection to do something cloud-based. How could we be expected to build and run this guy locally?
Well, what happens here is that, I wanted you to talk, so I didn't have to talk at the same time I was typing. So the way this works is that there's going to be a local developer fabric, and the local developer fabric allows or enables me to work with Azure on my local machine without having to interact with the cloud. And the great thing about that is, first of all, I can work in a disconnected mode, which is great. It's more or less like the Cassini personal web server type of thing that we had in the early days of ASP.NET, right? But it's also cool because it can take a while right now for you to get provisioned for your Azure user token, right? And one of the things I remember is that one of the people at Neudesic, Trinity, she downloaded the Azure SDK and built a pretty cool little application without having any access to an Azure developer token, right? So she had no account. She just built it up using the local developer fabric.
So you raised a really good point here. You folks who haven't really played with Azure yet, you ought to know a couple things. One is the website to visit is azure.com, azure.com. That's not only a good place to get lots of information and download SDKs, but it's also where you sign up for a cloud account. Now, if you haven't heard, the Azure platform isn't released yet. It won't be turned on for billing until sometime by end of year. But right now we're in a free preview period, which means you can get in and play for no billing charges with those restrictions. So it's a great time to get in there. To get an account, you need to have a Windows Live ID of some sort, which most of you probably already have. You need to go to Azure.com and sign up, and you'll get some tokens that turn on various parts of Azure for you. Those don't always come right away, so if you're interested in playing at any time and you want to go get that process started. On the other hand, as Mickey just mentioned, that doesn't stop you from playing with Azure immediately. You can download the SDK and you can add apps locally, and there's no waiting involved with that.
Yep. So I'm doing a couple of things here. I'm apparently confusing. Here we go. I always do my string quotes backwards. Okay. Okay, so what we're doing here is just like a regular ASP.NET app, it's pretty straightforward. What's going to happen is we're going to put some information in the text box, click the submit button, and we'll display some text in the label. One thing I'm doing is I'm writing to the Azure log, and that's available to me even if I'm running in the local web fabric. So if I just hit F5, assuming I can write 3 lines without a syntax error. Okay.
So far we've been pretty standard ASP.NET. You're hitting F5 to run it. The only thing I've seen you put in that isn't standard is this write to log thing.
Right.
So far it looks like a pretty familiar experience.
Right. What's going to happen right now is that as we're building it, you can see that the start application is not the web app. The start application is that webcast demo service. So what's going to happen is Visual Studio is going to see that that's an Azure app. It's going to spin up the developer fabric for me. And that's going to take just a minute here. You can see I'm running locally.
So your app is up, though. I see the page. So far it really seems like ASP.NET. You hit F5, and there's your page. So far, so good.
Right. So if we look here at the developer fabric.
Developer fabric, what's that?
Yeah, that's the local bits that are available to me so that I can manage my application. And the cool thing here is that, when I was in the config, I changed that from 1 instance, which is a default, to 3. And I actually have 3 different versions of my app. They're not versions, but 3 different instances of my app that are spun up right now. So this is similar to the sort of experience that you're going to have in the cloud. Today, my Azure account only allows me to upload 1 instance at a time, spin up 1 instance at a time. But I can deploy and test it here as if it was running in a little farm for me.
This is pretty amazing. So instead of running like usual ASP.NET, it seemed like that code-wise, instead of just getting an instance in the Cassini local Visual Studio, we've actually got multiple instances running here in this cloud simulator. Got a great view into it, and what is that? You were writing into a log earlier. What does that have to do with this?
Yeah. So what we can do is if I say hello to David Pallman, oops, sorry about that. Okay, so I have a JIT delay here. Okay, there we go. So hello, David Pallman. Hello, Mickey. All right, and if we go back, you can actually see that something's being updated in these. So if I click number 1, you can see that it has some log information in this. I don't know how well it's going to show up on anybody's desktop, but you can see there's actually a log there. This is hello, David Pallman, hello, Mickey. So I actually have instrumentation that's available to me right out of the box. And all I had to do to get that to work was use that role manager.write to log, and that's available to me.
Wow. And so is this log information just kind of temporary like this on the console, or is there a more permanent version of it?
Yeah, so we can get this in the database, and the cool thing is if we push this up to the cloud, we're not going to have time to show it, but we can blog it or find a reference to it somewhere. But you can actually write this to a blob up in the cloud, and then view that as your application is running. So if I have this application running in the cloud today, I could take a look at it and service the logs as it's running live. So that's pretty, and it just takes a fairly short amount of time for the logs to appear and be visible.
Pretty cool, and I noticed it looked like the logs were only written to one of the three instances. Can you explain why that is?
Well, because that's the instance we're actually running right now. So that was the instance that was selected, and that's the one I'm hitting. If I had multiple browsers running, I would be, hitting the other instances as well.
So are you saying these guys are automatically load balanced?
Yes. Isn't it amazing? And I wrote no code. So.
Neat.
Yeah.
What else can you do locally? Just so we're running things in the cloud. Is there anything else you can do locally? I'm thinking of storage. Yes, you can run storage.
Oh. David, I'm a manager. Don't ask me questions that I don't have answers for. Yeah, so there's storage locally, and I don't have it. Actually, don't have Azure storage running right now, but we could be writing and running against local storage.
Very good. Now, if you folks are wondering how we got the developer fabric, I don't know if we went into that in detail, but when you do this yourself, look at the new icons in the bottom right system tray area of your Windows desktop, and there's an icon to pull up this development fabric, and there's also one to pull up the what's called the developer storage.
Yeah. So it's there. So let's go. Well, why don't we deploy this to the cloud quickly? Well, that's yours. Let's close this. Okay. So a couple things here. One is, while I have the web browser up, let me just show you. This is the Azure user group site that David was talking about earlier, azureusergroup.com. And it appears that most people have only the cloud for their photos, but this is a good place to join up with other people that are using Azure, and it's also a place for you to register or find a local Azure user group. So here I am on Azure.com. Azure.com redirects to this somewhat longer URL, and what I'm going to do is sign in. I'm not going to be able to have both of them running at the same time, so let me sign in for me. Oh, I mistyped that. I have a Christopher Loan email or password type thing there going on there. Okay, so if I want to create a project, I actually have one spun up. I have a project spun up. I don't have anything on it, so let's go ahead and just delete this one. And here's a completely empty developer portal. So when we go to David's later, you'll see that they're actually, you can have many different projects running. I have a few different types of projects that I can create, live services, hosted service, storage account. This is going to be a hosted app. Oops. Don't click learn more. So I just create a name for the project. And then I pick out a name for us to use, and this is going to be a global name. So if I wanted to use...
so for example, you can't do Hello Cloud because somebody else has that. This is your production URL.
Right. So this is actually something that's going to be in the global space. So let's just do Mickey Williams webcast. I don't think that one's being used. Let's create that. Now this is going to go out and provision up in the cloud for me, right? So I'm starting to get some equipment and endpoints ready for me. And if I want to deploy this, the first thing I have to do is I have to publish my application. So we saw earlier that it seems to run locally. What I can do at this point is just right-click, publish.
Now, this part is important, folks. As you leave this part out, it won't work. You've got to go through this publish step. What you do is you go to that first project, the metadata service project. Right-click that, and you'll see a publish option.
It's right here. So it wasn't the web app, and it's not the solution. It's the metadata solution.
The project, yes.
Yeah. All right, sorry. Yeah.
Publish. And when you do publish it, it'll sit there a little bit and build your app. But the two things you'll see visually is it'll fire up the Azure portal. I think you already had it up, but it'll fire that up in a browser just in case you didn't have it up. And we'll also open a Windows Explorer window to your published directory. This is where your solution has been packaged up into a cloud service package file, plus where your config file is saying how many instances you want of the different roles. These are the two things you're going to be uploading.
Yeah, and the thing is, we haven't done anything yet that's actually terribly complex or difficult to follow, right? I mean, this is all fairly straightforward. So if you go here, I've got two little glass cubes, and I want to deploy, and you notice I can't deploy directly to prod. I have to go to staging, which is excellent, I think. It actually makes you behave yourself, right?
You'll get your prompt in a second there, Mickey.
Yeah, I'm furiously clicking.
So I want to cut the process because of time. It does take sometimes a few minutes to fully provision something up to upload to the portal. On the flip side, I've never seen the execution on the cloud be anything but very fast and accessible. But it can take a few minutes to upload to the portal, so we may or may not finish it during this webcast.
Right. So this application package is really all of the different bits for the application in a zip file, right? I mean, it's really not anything spectacular about that package. And then my configuration file is going to be in the same directory.
Now, you might be wondering why the configuration file is separate from the package, but there's actually a reason for that. Again, that controls things like the number of instances of your front end and your back end. That's separate because you can actually change that later on at runtime in the portal. So that's if you want more instances, you can just go to the portal and change the settings.
Like this, for instance. Okay, if I had tried to upload that, that would have been a problem. So let's just...
Mickey.
Because I'm not allowed to have 3 instances today on my evaluation account. So I'm going to have to update that config file and republish it, and we'll be good to go. Okay. And that was just the config file. So there we go. And a label. Take one. All right.
Now, what's the purpose of the label, Mickey?
Well, so we can have, it'll be labeled here. So you can see in staging, we've got demo 1. And that could be a build number. It could be any other sort of tag that we want to attach to those bits that we're running. And at some point, we might have something deployed in staging and something else in production. And it's nice to be able to keep them separate and be able to tag the bits. Because we are going to have multiple versions rolling through the website. You can see here we have our domain name, our URL, or base URL is mwwebcast.cloudapp.net.
So I understand the production URL, but how would we get to staging?
Well, we're going to get a staging GUID assigned to us, or a staging URL assigned to us, and it's going to include a GUID. It's not going to be publicly accessible. Sorry, it'll be publicly accessible, but it's not going to be having a friendly name. So
by being cryptic, nobody else is going to really know about it.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's this obfuscation sort of security type of thing there. So. Okay, so there's our URL. If anybody online wants to hurry up and get there, you can try it out.
Well, actually, it won't work out because we're deployed, but we're not running.
Yeah, so let's click the run, and there it goes. And now this is going to take a while. We should go back to the slides and let this cook for a while, and we'll come back to it. Even though it looks nice and blue and looks like it might be running, it's going to take a bit.
Now, earlier it looked like there was an interesting little button. There it is, between the what's that all about?
Okay, this is the way we can promote from staging to production or vice versa. So at some point we'll have staging running, and if we decide that we want to push that out and have it run in the cloud, we can just click that button and it'll move it over it'll basically swap DNS entries and we'll be running in prod at that point. That's the same way we can do a rolling update, right? So we'll be able to, once the application's up there, if we want to offer updates, we can upload new version to staging and then promote that up into production.
So one-click promotion is what you're telling me.
Yeah, so if you look at the things that we've had so far here, I have a pretty nice logging story that came with absolutely no effort. I have a nice deployment and provisioning story that comes with no effort. And I have this nice promotion from staging to prod that comes with just the click of a button. So all these pieces together are actually pretty nice for me. I mean, these are all things that you and I have done before, but they're not things that we've done and been able to leverage with absolutely no effort. So.
Good.
Okay, so back to our slides. Oops. Wait a minute. Okay, there we go. So what kinds of things how will Azure impact different sorts of developers and different kinds of stakeholders, right? So we think that all developers are going to see things like this idea of infinite capacity and infinite scale. One thing that I noticed, and you and I were talking in October on a webcast, and we were talking about how we'd already started to see in our own behavior that when we would look at an application, we would start thinking about, well, how would the cloud impact this application? Is there something we could do differently? Is there something we can take advantage of? That kind of thing. Also, this idea that when you get into this isn't the kind of talk where we're going to dive deep into the technical details, but these are really not new skills that you need to take advantage of the cloud. So what we're talking about is HTTP, we're talking about REST, we're talking about XML, we're talking about just basic SOAP sort of protocols. We're talking about, when you get to the security side, there's some federation that might be new to people, but it's not difficult, and there are tools and command consoles and that kind of thing to help you get over that hump. It's really taking advantage of tools that you already know how to use, and really it's all about having these new choices. So now we have new places to locate our software, new sorts of application models. This idea that we can have applications that today are running on 3 servers, and next month we're going to have to spin up to 50 servers and then back down to 5 or 6 servers a month after. We can handle that kind of thing now, so it's actually pretty exciting.
So if you're a developer watching this, if a .NET developer, you're going to have all the skills you need. There may be some new things to get acquainted with and new possibilities to get used to, but you're going to have all the skill set you need. And in fact, because a lot of the platform can be accessed through HTTP web requests and REST URLs, if you're a non-Microsoft developer, you likely have all the skills you need to access the platform.
Right. So enterprise development. We talked a little bit about this, but one thing is the capital spending thing. So you can have capital expenditures that you're laying out today where we actually have to sit down and do some planning and make some hard choices and decide how much upfront expenditure we're going to make. We can actually change that into an operating expense, which is pretty exciting. The idea of reducing the IT footprint, that's something that's interesting. If you think about it, most companies are not in the infrastructure business. A lot of times they're forced into getting into the business just to keep their websites or their web apps running, and that's something you can kind of move away from a bit with the cloud. So we can actually build a fairly sophisticated application without having to make a huge investment in the data center and those skills.
And again, keep in mind that this whole initiative is not just about technology, but also about new business opportunities. And so Azure may or may not be interesting to you technically, and it may or may not be interesting to the business side of the house. Either side may generate interest on the other side.
Right.
So for enterprise developers, we already mentioned that there is a couple different patterns you can use here, and Again, the idea is no matter where your software is now, you can extend it in new and interesting ways without feeling like you have to do everything over.
Right. Right. And then if you look at the application model, I mean, if you look at this, David, isn't this just what we're doing today on applications anyway? I mean, sure, we have the web role and the worker role, but today we have a web server and an app server and a storage. I mean, it's really a very simple architecture that I think just about anybody on the call, even if you're not an architect, could understand this kind of model, right?
Not only is it simple, not only has there not been any added complexity, but actually, if you look at what we've been doing here with REST and these simple role patterns we're beginning, things have actually gotten simpler and easier than in the enterprise. So it's very refreshing new thinking and refactoring going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And then another exciting thing is integration. We're actually seeing a lot of interest around people that have applications that they know they want to share with partners, or they have applications that they want maybe their existing internal services and they want to put them up in the cloud so that they can be shared out. And we see that as a very compelling story for people that have business partners where they want to be able to share that information. And we're not going to have time to talk about it in a lot of detail, but that whole area of .NET services is very exciting. I mean, this idea that we can share and connect applications through a .NET Services subscription, even through a firewall. That's actually pretty exciting.
That's right. And if you've been an EAI developer in the past, that might have mostly meant internal integration within the enterprise too. But now connecting to the cloud through relays and integrating with other businesses is really part of the same discipline now.
Right. And then also the fact that we can offer SQL Server features and also workflow up in the cloud, that's all very exciting. So the service apps, I mean, from my point of view, David, this is really kind of the evolution of SOA, right? I mean, this is something where we've been preaching service-oriented architecture forever, and now this is just kind of like a validation of a lot of things that people have been talking about for a long time.
That's right. And anybody who's tried to put in SOA has found that it's not just services, right? But you've got to think about, do I need some supporting infrastructure like service buses and things like that, or governance products to make all of these services that are supposed to be somewhat autonomous and internal black boxes really work in an enterprise? You need some sort of governance environment there. Well, the cloud is a wonderful playground for services, and it gives you so much that you want out of that, like on-demand scale and logging what's going on and good controls.
Right. Now, from the SQL Server developer's point of view, it's kind of interesting. There actually is a cloud BI demo that's available. I don't have the URL handy, but there's a proof of concept type of thing that Microsoft hung up earlier or late last year. But there's this idea that SQL Server is now more of a data platform. So they've got a super scalability story that includes the idea that if I have information that I'm writing to SQL storage and I'm using SQL data services for it, there is all kinds of work that's done with fault domains for me so that my application will always have access to my data. So something that would be actually very expensive and difficult for me to configure in the enterprise, especially if I'm on a smaller team, it's actually very easy for me to get if I'm using Azure. Right, David?
That's right. So, again, some of the hardest things to pull off in the enterprise, as we know from personal experience, things like dynamic scalability and high availability, disaster recovery, many of these aspects are just built into the platform every time you use it. You don't have to do anything special to realize these benefits. Right.
And .coms, this is a great thing, right? Because the one problem that if you're starting out with any kind of a company that has an online presence is that big upfront investment is actually a big point of stress for you, right? So you have to do planning, you have to get money together, you have to arrange leases and that kind of thing. If we could have an application that would basically grow up with us, the infrastructure would just kind of grow as we grew, that would be actually very compelling. So this idea that we can store data in the cloud, we can take advantage of live mesh and use synchronization stories, federated identity. I mean, that's all pretty cool stuff.
Yep. So so the traditional planning headaches that you just mentioned go away. You don't have to decide up front what you're going to commit to. Anything you want is there. If you're not using capacity, you're not paying for it. But also there's all these great additional things, which we don't have time to go into today, but for example, social networking features of the live platform, for example, offeryour.com, new capabilities that really weren't available in the past unless you built them yourself.
Right. Right. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I love this scenario. I can apply the .coms too. Whether you're a new business or an entrepreneur, a startup, or maybe just an experimental division of a well-established business, I love this scenario. You're going to deploy something new, let's say it's a website, to the cloud for a business initiative. And so you write your software and you put it up there in the cloud, and hopefully you'll be successful. Maybe you're only a little bit successful. Probably you'll have a small bill. Maybe you're moderately successful. You'll have a bigger bill, but presumably you're making money on your solution. You need, massive capacity. Well, it's out there for you also. Much bigger bill, but again, you're making money on your business initiative. Now, this really is a win-win situation because although we hope you'll be successful, let's say you're not successful. Nobody uses your application. Well, you haven't paid any money. So it really is a no-risk way to experiment.
Right. I have this story where back in the 90s, it's a little long for the webcast, but back in the 90s, I actually bought a web server for a scandalous amount of money. And, the application I was building didn't go anywhere. And I had this basically in a very expensive, very large box in my garage, which my wife happily reminded me over and over again how much we paid for it. But, yeah, so that's... That would have been nice to have the cloud available for me back then. I like this one, the idea that everybody has access to this kind of data center, right? It really democratizes the whole idea that people that are in places that whether it's I have a lack of capital or maybe I'm just in a part of the world where I have a lack of infrastructure. Suddenly I have this giant data center that's available to me, right?
At the PDC they showed a data center, that's in quotes, in Ethiopia. It was really just a half-empty rack with two gentlemen who were very proud of it. Really anybody now, regardless of where they live in the world now, can compete on an equal footing with the finest data centers in the world. And that's huge. You're no longer punished based on where you happen to be born.
All right. And then finally the naysayers, right?
Well,
I like your pioneers and settlers story.
Yeah, so the pioneers, those of us who like technology and get involved with it first, aren't always the settlers. Those who come in later. There's a very well-established pattern. If you look at, for example, web services and the second generation of web services around the time WCF was released, an awful lot of people saw the light and got involved very, very early on. But there were those who said, well, we'll probably get involved with that technology eventually, but we're going to kind of wait and see that it's established, and that's normal. That's fine. And then there were also a few companies who said, well, that's interesting, but we don't really think web services is for us. Well, those last few companies in that last category, they have web services now because as they've gotten new versions of this CRM, whether ERP or other services or packages they use, APIs now tend to be service-based. And so they sort of forced their way into the enterprise because of the wave of adoption was big and real enough. And this feels very much the same way. Some of us are getting involved with this now because we like it or because we see certain capabilities of the business model being particularly compelling. Others will wait, and others will wait longer. But we believe this is just as big the wave as .NET.
Yep. Hey, so let's go back to our little app that we had running. Okay. And I am here. Okay, so it looks like our current status is started. So if we click on the URL, what I claim will happen is that our application will launch.
So while we're waiting to see if that actually does happen, let me point out a couple of things. The first time you launch an application that's been deployed, maybe a little slow. The first time you try to run out of Visual Studio locally, maybe a little slow. There's sort of the usual startup, just-in-time compilation things going on. In the case of the cloud upload, there's DNS stuff going on. The first time may be a little slow. Please don't let that dismay you. The second time should be delightful. Right.
And the other thing is, even if we've been watching the water boil, as it were, if we've been watching the poll when it initially said started, sometimes there's a delay even after it says started before the DNS entry gets propagated, I think. I mean, sometimes it takes just a short period of time. So here we go.
Hey, it's up.
It appears to be up.
And
it appears to run. Yeah, how about that? We are in the cloud. Okay. So the next thing would be to actually promote this. So if we just promote that by clicking the button. And now if we go to mwwebcast.cloudapp.net, there it is. So if anybody that's on the call can actually try that, right? We don't have any credential requirements or anything like that. So.
Well, we could if we wanted to.
We could if we wanted to. And in fact, that leads us into our next little app here. So I think we're going to have to.
I think we're running out of time now. We wanted to have some question and answer period, I believe.
Okay. So there we are. We're running in prod. mwwebcast.cloudapp.net if you want to try it.
Why don't we just mention the other one without actually spending any time on it?
Okay.
I just wanted to bring it up without interacting with it. The site, we have a demo called LifeTracks, which is a social networking website, and it's lifetracks.cloudapp.net. As you've seen, .cloudapp.net is the production URL for anything in the Azure cloud. It's a real-looking website, and it shows 3 areas of Azure. It's a cloud-hosted website, like the one we just built. It uses Cloud Switch to store your, it's sort of like Facebook status, but also uses Windows Live ID for authentication. So if you want to get a taste of several aspects of Azure, you can do that. It is also on CodePlex under the name LifeTrack, and so it's not just something to keep online for you to play with, but it's also something that you can download the source code to and see how it works and perhaps extend it.
Yeah, it's a fairly substantial app. So I have it here in Visual Studio. You know, it's a fairly large app, and it includes Live ID integration, which is pretty cool. So it's actually not entirely trivial. So what I like about this is that I can keep I can keep track of my things, and it also gives me this kind of a rolling what I do yesterday, what I do today, what I'm planning to do tomorrow. It's kind of like a nice little to-do list. So
the idea of the theme of the app was it's this popular idea of what are you doing right now status. Except why limit it to what right now? Why don't we have what you've done in the past, what you plan to do in the future, and also get beyond just a single sentence for status and let you attach media and things like that.
Yep. So that is up on CodePlex. So if you go to CodePlex, just to prove it's there. LifeTracks. There it is. So it includes the source, and you also have a PDF, and you have all kinds of things about it, right?
Yep, it's pretty complete, so it should be no problem to build that yourself and run it.
Okay, cool. All right, so just finishing up here, so we can get to the Q&A.
Perhaps I want to bring up that final resources slide.
Yeah. There we are. Also summary, I think we talked about this, but here's the user group information. So everyone's definitely welcome to join that, and if you're if there's not a user group where you are, then you can always spin one up. And here's our resources. So there are some changes coming to SQL data services, but you can read all about them on those links. And then also the Azure user group.
So if you just go to Azure User Group and also go to Azure.com, Azure.com will actually lead you to the Developers Centers for all the different parts of Azure. So that's actually the most important thing to remember.
Yep. And that's also where you go to register for developer tokens and access. So it's kind of like the one-stop shop for everything Azure.
It's also where you download the SDK. So multiple reasons to get familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I just noticed, David, I don't think that they require you to create, there was this weird thing where you had to create you had to create a mesh app before you could actually download the SDK. I think they fixed that.
It may have changed, but yeah, it seemed at least in the past, it was that you actually had to go to a live services project in the portal get the download link.
Yeah, that was excellent. Okay, all right. So I think we're done. We can pick up some Q&A, right?
Okay, great. Thank you both so much for this wonderful presentation. We did have a few questions come through. Let's first start off with, what is the performance impact of the application making calls back to the on-premise resources?
Great question. I'm not sure there's a very good or automatic answer. First off, because during this preview period, although we're allowed to play for free, as Mickey showed earlier, we're not allowed to have very many instances. So it's not possible today to put up a cloud app that is doing a whole lot of processing. So performance measurements don't mean that much. As far as what the performance would be of accessing things between the cloud and local enterprise, right now they've unlocked the HTTP protocol for us. So you're kind of talking about HTTP level performance talking between your enterprise and the cloud. Some patterns are starting to emerge for best practices already, and one of them is keep your code and your data close together if you can. So that means if you've got code accessing data very frequently, you probably want to keep those two things either local or in the cloud together as opposed to going over the internet between them.
Right. I mean, I would imagine I would be shocked if the performance wasn't on a par to what you see today when you're exchanging, when you have service interaction between two partners. Right. I would imagine it's going to be a little bit better or about the same is what I would expect.
Okay, great. Go ahead. You're going to go ahead, Nikki?
Oh, yeah, and the other thing is that there are several options for that communication if you're using a relay. So the relay endpoints offered by the services are really the same as the bindings you're familiar with today with WCF, but they've just been modified to, instead of a relationship being established between your application and HTTP sys and the kernel, there's a relationship set up between your application and the cloud. So you'll see the same WCF-like performance you see today.
I think a lot of the best practices of SOA apply here. One of the best practices of SOA is when you design services is to give them coarse-grained interfaces and not be too chatty about talking to them. And the reason for that is not all service interaction is expensive, but some is, and the developer and designer is supposed to sort of think that way. I think that's true of the cloud, too, in a sensible fashion.
Yep, completely agree. Yep.
Okay, let us know if that answers your question or if you need any additional information or clarification. Our next question is, do you know what Microsoft has in mind for SLA? Any updated promises?
So
for uptime, that kind of thing?
Well, we know that they have an SLA in mind, but they haven't shared the details yet. Likewise, we have some ideas of the business model, but we don't know the rates yet. We're expecting by end of year to have that information.
Yeah, so in general, it's going to be the same as you see in terms of the way you're billed. It's going to be similar to, I would imagine, to what you see with other vendors, right? I mean, you'll pay for compute time, you'll pay for storage, you'll pay for bandwidth, that kind of thing.
Yeah, the original question was about SLA, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Not sure what we're going to see there. Is there going to be one SLA or several levels of service to choose from? We're all waiting to see.
All right.
Okay, great. Next question. What is the time delay from when I save to SQL data storage and then want to read it?
I'm not sure what the time delay is, but I will tell you one thing about storage. Well, when you store something in Azure, first of all, you have to know that things get stored in multiple places. So, for example, if I did something that resulted in a disk write, I'm really getting 3 disk writes, each in a separate fault domain, and that's for security of my data should something fail. You also have synchronization guarantees, so that after doing a write like that and you read something back, you're guaranteed to get the latest copy. Now, as far as with the delay to write an SES and back, I haven't measured that, and again, I'm not sure the measurements mean that much right now because we can't do large-scale testing yet, or free experimental accounts and let us have very large numbers of instances. I do think that's a very good question, an important one, and I'm sure a lot of folks will be measuring that and publishing the results as soon as these restrictions are lifted.
Right. Well, I mean, the story around SQL Server or SQL data services is changing, so I would stay tuned there. My assumption is that if I do at some point, if I do a transacted write, I'll have options that tell me whether or not I want that to be immediately visible at the end of the transaction, or if there's going to be some propagation delay. I mean, I would imagine there would be something like that, right? I mean, in terms of a distributed system, David, you can't. Would you agree? You can't have a system where I think a transaction is executed and nobody else can see it yet, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The one thing to mention about performance, so a lot of people, we've been sort of pointing out how good the infrastructure is in the cloud and how it gives you a lot of great capabilities built in. That's true. Sometimes people confuse that with what kind of hardware is being run in the cloud. The cloud is not running the most expensive hardware you could buy. The cloud is actually designed to run commodity hardware, to have an infrastructure that scales it well and has redundancy and all of that. So, talking very loosely, you can expect the same performance you would get from average computer hardware.
Right.
All right. Nikki or David, talk a little bit about the pricing structure. Have they started on that yet? Any ROI white papers?
So we know the business model is around the general idea of paying monthly for certain things, and those categories of things you might pay for include monthly charge on compute time, monthly charge on data storage, probably a monthly charge on communication in and out of the data center. So, for example, if your cloud-hosted app called a service that's outside of the Azure hosting environment, that might be something you pay for. Those groupings we had earlier, SQL data services, .NET services, live services, it's not very clear yet, it hasn't been announced anyway, if there are maybe going to be different models for the different areas as well. I will say this, there is an event just kicking off at the Mix event, and we believe there may be probably several junctures throughout the year. It's probably usually around at big conferences where we may get additional updates and additional announcements to Microsoft. So it's possible we get some new information as soon as a week from now.
Okay, great. If there are no further questions at this time, please feel free to write in another question. I know we're running a few minutes over. Nikki, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, there's somebody had asked a question about using a load balancer like Big IP. That really, there's balancing that's done for you in the cloud, and part of that is done because, if the application if your application is running and it's running in this virtualized environment, you may not even be aware of at the time that machines are coming on and offline. So if the data center detects that a machine is failing, it's going to be pulled offline and a new one spun up in its place. So in the general case, you're not going to need to have that sort of management that you would normally have using something like Big IP. But if the question is more along the lines of, will I be able to do some of the same things, like if I'm doing a rolling update and I want to be able to pull servers in and out of the pool, those are things that I've heard will be available, but I haven't seen any concrete announcements of exactly what the feature set's going to be. So if the question is, will I be able to pull servers in and out of the pool? Will I be able to see what's going on? The answer, as I understand it, is yes, but there's no concrete information about that I've seen.
As far as like you can be able to manage state with SQL Server in the cloud, you can build that now. I think maybe the question is Microsoft going to give us a provider like that? I don't think we've seen it yet, but I can't speak for Microsoft, but I believe very much the plan is to fill in any gaps there and give you facilities that you used to. That was certainly one of them.
Okay, one last question has come through. When will Azure be released?
So the last public statement was that Azure would go live sometime second half of calendar 2009. So I think by end of year, it'll be turned on. For exactly what month, I don't think that's been announced yet.
And if it follows other types of rollouts, what you might see is you'll have an ability to host your application on it, or you'll be able to run your own internal POCs on it. There might be some sort of a go live. It's probably not going to be the case that on some arbitrary date in the future, suddenly it's going to be available and you had no opportunity to interact with it. So I imagine it's going to be kind of a rolling sort of a thing. So.
Yeah, typically Microsoft will announce these things around some events. They have events throughout the years for developers and other groups.
Right.
Okay. Well, we are running about 17 minutes over, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, David and Mickey, for today's presentation. I think it was very beneficial. We will be forwarding all of both the slide deck and a recorded version of the presentation today when it becomes available in about a week's time. In the meantime, if you have any questions about the presentation, please feel free to reach out to Neudesic. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next podcast. Thank you.
Everybody. All right. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.